The text message arrived at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, 3 weeks before what was supposed to be the most beautiful wedding I'd ever helped plan. I was reviewing final invoices for the Rosewood Estate ceremony, $130,000 of pure elegance that would make my granddaughter Sophia's dreams come true, when my phone buzzed with a notification that would shatter my heart and change everything. Grandma Eleanor, Brandon and I have made a difficult decision. Please don't come to the wedding. Your presence will create drama and ruin our special day. We need this to be about us, not family conflicts. Hope you understand. Sophia. I read the message 3 times, each reading making the words more surreal and painful. 24 years of loving this child, 8 years of being her primary family after her father died, and now she was uninviting me from the wedding I was paying for because my presence would create drama. I set my phone down on my kitchen counter and stared at the stack of vendor contracts spread before me. The Rosewood Estate booking confirmation for $45,000. Platinum catering services for $32,000. Enchanted Gardens floral arrangements for $18,000. Symphony Strings Quartet for $8,000. Bella Vista photography and videography for $15,000. The designer cake from Artisan Confections for $4,500. The luxury linens, upgraded lighting, premium bar service, transportation, and dozens of other details that had accumulated into the most expensive gift I'd ever given anyone. All of it arranged because 3 months ago, Sophia had come to me with tears in her eyes, explaining that she and Brandon couldn't afford the wedding they dreamed of on their combined influencer income. She'd shown me pictures of the Rosewood Estate, a breathtaking venue in wine country that was booked solid for 2 years unless someone could pay the premium rate for last-minute availability. Grandma, I know it's a lot of money, but this is the only chance we'll ever have to get married somewhere this beautiful. Brandon's followers are expecting something spectacular, and if we can't deliver, it could hurt both our careers. I'd written the check that same day, not because of Brandon's social media career, which I frankly didn't understand, but because Sophia had never asked me for anything significant before, and I had more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes since selling my boutique chain 5 years earlier. Now, apparently, the granddaughter I'd raised after her parents died in a car accident when she was 16 didn't want me present to witness the celebration I was funding. I picked up my phone and called Sophia directly. It went straight to voicemail, which wasn't unusual since she and Brandon often had their phones on silent for their content creation work. Sophia, it's Grandma. I received your message about the wedding and I'm confused. Could you call me back so we can discuss this? I love you, sweetheart. An hour passed with no return call. I tried again, with the same result. Finally, I sent a text. Sophia, I need to understand what's happened. What family conflicts are you referring to? When have I ever created drama at your events? The response came back immediately. Grandma, you know how you can be. Always wanting to control everything and make things about yourself. Brandon thinks it would be better if you just celebrated with us from a distance. I felt something cold settle in my chest as I realized that this decision had been Brandon's idea, not Sophia's. In the 3 years since my granddaughter had been dating this young man, I'd watched him systematically isolate her from friends who didn't fit his aesthetic, family members who questioned his motives, and anyone who might threaten his influence over her decisions. Brandon Walsh was 26 years old, devastatingly handsome in the way that social media demanded, and blessed with the kind of superficial charm that attracted followers but never seemed to extend to genuine kindness toward people who couldn't advance his career. He'd grown up wealthy in Silicon Valley, the son of tech executives who'd given him everything except character, and he'd parlayed his privileged lifestyle into an Instagram following of 3 million people who apparently enjoyed watching him travel, eat expensive food, and offer lifestyle advice from his parents' money. What Brandon had never offered was respect for Sophia's family, particularly her middle-class grandmother who'd built her wealth through decades of hard work rather than inheritance. He'd made subtle comments about my dated taste in restaurants, my traditional views on relationships, and my involvement in decisions that should be left to the couple. But I'd tolerated Brandon's condescension because Sophia seemed happy, and because I'd assumed that maturity in marriage might improve his character. Clearly, I'd been wrong. I opened my laptop and began reviewing the vendor contracts I'd signed for Sophia's wedding. Every single agreement included detailed cancellation policies, most of which allowed for full refunds if cancellation occurred more than 72 hours before the event date. Some vendors required 48 hours notice, others a full week, but the wedding was still 3 weeks away. As I read through the cancellation terms, I realized that Sophia and Brandon had made a critical error in timing. They'd uninvited me before securing the wedding financing, apparently assuming that family obligation and emotional manipulation would ensure I continued paying for a celebration I was banned from attending. They'd miscalculated badly. I spent the next 2 hours documenting every expense related to Sophia's wedding, creating a detailed spreadsheet that showed exactly how much money Brandon's disrespect was about to cost him. The total came to $127,147 when I included the engagement party I'd hosted at my home 2 months earlier, the designer dress I'd purchased for Sophia, and various pre-wedding events I'd funded. Nearly $130,000 for a celebration that I was apparently too dramatic to attend. At 3 a.m., I made a decision that would have consequences neither Sophia nor Brandon had anticipated. I wasn't going to argue with them about their choice to exclude me, wasn't going to plead for inclusion in their special day, and wasn't going to enable their assumption that family members could be discarded once their financial utility had been exhausted. I was going to respect their wishes exactly. If my presence would ruin their wedding, then my money could ruin it just as effectively. I opened my phone and began making a list of every vendor, every service provider, every person who was expecting payment for Sophia's dream wedding. Tomorrow morning, I would start making calls, not to create drama or seek revenge, but to simply withdraw from a celebration that no longer included me. If Sophia and Brandon wanted a wedding without family conflicts, they were about to get exactly what they'd asked for. Some lessons I was about to demonstrate were worth $130,000 to teach, and some grandmothers had the financial power to make their exclusion from family events considerably more expensive than their inclusion. Brandon Walsh was about to learn that disrespecting wealthy family members had costs that extended far beyond hurt feelings. The wedding of his dreams was about to become the nightmare of his own making. I woke up Wednesday morning with the kind of clarity that comes from making a difficult decision in the middle of the night. After brewing my coffee and settling into my home office, I spread out all the wedding vendor contracts across my mahogany desk like a general planning a strategic retreat. The first call I made was to my attorney, Patricia Wells, who'd handled my business affairs for the past 15 years and understood exactly how to navigate contract cancellations without legal complications. Eleanor, let me make sure I understand this correctly. Your granddaughter has uninvited you from her wedding, which you're funding entirely, and you want to cancel all vendor agreements? That's correct, Patricia. I want to exercise every cancellation clause available while staying within legal boundaries. If Sophia doesn't want me at her wedding, then she can plan and pay for her own wedding. Eleanor, I have to ask, is this a decision you're making from hurt feelings or from sound judgment? Because once you cancel these vendors 3 weeks before the event, there won't be any reasonable way to undo that decision. I thought about Patricia's question while looking at the framed photograph of Sophia at her high school graduation, radiant and grateful as I applauded from the front row. 8 years of being her primary family, supporting her through college, celebrating her achievements, and providing the love and stability she'd needed after losing her parents. Patricia, this is sound judgment. Sophia has chosen Brandon's influence over family relationships, and she needs to understand the consequences of that choice before she makes it permanent through marriage. All right, let me review these contracts and start making calls. Eleanor, most of these vendors will retain deposits, but you should recover about 80% of your payments. I don't care about recovering money, Patricia. I care about ensuring that Sophia understands the value of family relationships before it's too late to repair them. After ending the call with Patricia, I decided to make one more attempt at direct communication with Sophia. I drove to the apartment she shared with Brandon in downtown San Francisco, a trendy loft in a converted warehouse that perfectly suited their social media aesthetic. Sophia answered the door wearing one of Brandon's oversized designer hoodies and the expression of someone who'd been dreading this conversation. Grandma Eleanor, I hoped you'd understand without us having to discuss this in person. Sophia, I need you to explain something to me. In what way have I created drama at your events? When have I ever made your celebrations about myself? It's not about specific incidents. It's about the dynamic you create with Brandon. He feels like you're always judging him, always questioning his decisions, and he can't relax around you. Sophia, can you give me a concrete example of when I've judged Brandon or questioned his decisions? She was quiet for several moments, apparently searching her memory for evidence to support her claim. You ask a lot of questions about his business plans and his income. I ask about his business because you're planning to marry him and build a life together. Understanding his financial stability isn't judgment, it's practical family concern. Brandon says that's not your business. Brandon is correct that his finances aren't my business, but my granddaughter's financial security is absolutely my business, especially when I'm funding her wedding to someone whose income comes from social media sponsorships that could disappear overnight. Sophia's expression shifted from defensive to irritated, and I could see Brandon's influence in the way she framed my concern as inappropriate rather than loving. Grandma, this is exactly what Brandon means. You can't just trust that we know what's best for our own lives. Sophia, I've trusted your judgment completely until now, but uninviting me from your wedding while expecting me to pay for it suggests that your judgment has been compromised by someone who doesn't value family relationships. Brandon values family relationships. He just thinks we need to establish boundaries with people who try to control our decisions. What decisions have I tried to control, Sophia? Again, silence stretched between us as Sophia struggled to provide specific examples of my alleged controlling behavior. Brandon appeared from the kitchen, looking carefully casual in his athleisure wear and perfectly styled hair that probably took an hour to achieve its effortless appearance. Eleanor, I didn't realize you were coming over. Sophia and I were just planning some content for today's posts. Brandon, I came to understand why you and Sophia feel my presence would create drama at your wedding. Look, Eleanor, I respect everything you've done for Sophia, but she's building a new life now. Sometimes old family dynamics can interfere with a couple's fresh start. What old family dynamics are you referring to? Just the typical grandmother-granddaughter stuff. You raised her, so naturally you want to maintain that parental role even though she's an adult now. I felt a chill at Brandon's casual dismissal of 8 years of being Sophia's primary family as typical grandmother-granddaughter stuff. Brandon, I've never treated Sophia as anything other than an independent adult, but I've also never stopped caring about her welfare and happiness. Right, but caring can become controlling if you're not careful. Sophia needs space to make her own decisions without feeling like she has to consider how those decisions will affect your feelings. I see. And you believe that my presence at your wedding would prevent Sophia from making independent decisions? It's more about the energy, you know? Wedding days should be pure joy and celebration, not navigating complex family relationships. I looked at Sophia, who was nodding along with Brandon's explanation as if it made perfect sense, and realized that she'd been systematically programmed to view our close relationship as problematic rather than precious. Sophia, do you agree with Brandon's assessment that our relationship is too complex for your wedding day? Grandma, I just want everything to be perfect. Brandon's right that weddings are stressful enough without worrying about family dynamics. What family dynamics would you be worried about? Just, making sure everyone gets along and nobody feels left out or criticized. I realized that Sophia couldn't articulate any specific concerns because there weren't any. Brandon had convinced her that problems existed where none had occurred, creating anxiety about imaginary conflicts to justify excluding me from their celebration. Sophia, Brandon, I understand your decision. If you believe that my absence will make your wedding day more perfect, then I respect that choice. Relief washed over both their faces as they assumed I was capitulating to their demands. Thank you for understanding, Grandma. This doesn't mean we love you any less. Of course not, Brandon added. We're just prioritizing our relationship and our future together. I understand completely. In fact, I've already taken steps to ensure that your wedding day will be exactly what you've envisioned, without any interference from me. They both smiled, apparently missing the subtle warning in my tone. That's wonderful, Eleanor. I think you'll find that this decision actually strengthens family relationships in the long run, Brandon said, with the condescending confidence of someone who believed he'd successfully managed a difficult family situation. As I drove home from their apartment, I reflected on the conversation I'd just had with two young people who'd convinced themselves that discarding family members was a sign of maturity rather than manipulation. In 6 hours, Patricia would begin making calls to cancel every vendor, every service, every detail of the wedding that Brandon and Sophia had planned but couldn't afford. Some lessons about family relationships required consequences that matched the significance of the decisions that created them. And some young men were about to discover that isolating their partners from wealthy family members had costs they'd never calculated. Tomorrow, Brandon and Sophia would begin learning exactly how expensive their perfect wedding day was going to be without my dramatic presence. Thursday morning brought the beginning of what would become the most systematically devastating series of phone calls I'd ever overseen. Patricia had arrived at my house at 8 a.m. sharp with a legal briefcase and the kind of professional determination that had made her one of the most effective attorneys in the Bay Area. Eleanor, I've reviewed every contract, and the good news is that you're protected legally on all cancellations. The challenging news is that this is going to be a logistical nightmare for everyone involved, including innocent vendors who've been planning this event for months. Patricia, I understand that this will create difficulties for service providers, but Sophia and Brandon created this situation by assuming they could exclude me while keeping my financial support. Understood. Let's start with the venue, since that's the foundation for everything else. Patricia dialed the Rosewood estate while I listened on speakerphone, my coffee growing cold as I prepared to dismantle the wedding of Sophia's dreams. Good morning. This is Patricia Wells representing Eleanor Richardson regarding the Walsh-Richardson wedding on November 18th. Mrs. Richardson needs to cancel the venue booking immediately. Oh no. Is everything all right? That's one of our most elaborate bookings this year. Unfortunately, there have been irreconcilable family differences that make the event impossible to proceed as planned. I see. Well, according to our contract, Mrs. Richardson is entitled to a full refund minus a $5,000 processing fee since we're more than 2 weeks from the event date. However, I should mention that the couple called us yesterday, asking about upgrading several services and adding additional guests. Patricia and I exchanged glances. Brandon and Sophia were still planning upgrades to a wedding they'd uninvited me from, apparently confident that I'd continue funding their celebration regardless of their treatment. The booking is canceled effective immediately. Please send all refund paperwork to my office. Of course. Should I contact the couple directly about this cancellation? No, they'll be informed through appropriate channels. After ending the call, Patricia began working through the vendor list systematically. Each conversation followed a similar pattern: initial shock, questions about the reasons for cancellation, and eventually acceptance that the legal documentation supported our right to withdraw from all agreements. The catering company was particularly understanding. Mrs. Richardson, I have to say, in 30 years of wedding catering, I've learned that family conflicts that emerge before the wedding usually indicate much deeper problems. You may be saving everyone from a very expensive mistake. By noon, we'd canceled the venue, catering, floral arrangements, music, photography, transportation, and cake. The luxury linens rental, upgraded lighting, premium bar service, and specialty decorations would all be returned to vendors who'd scramble to book other clients for the November 18th weekend. Eleanor, there's one more vendor I think you should call personally, Patricia said, consulting her notes. The Wedding Dress Boutique. Sophia's dress was a $8,000 custom creation that's been tailored specifically for her measurements. I felt a pang of sadness thinking about Sophia in her dream dress, which she'd selected during a shopping trip that had been one of our happiest afternoons together in months. Patricia, let me handle that call myself. I dialed Bella Boutique and spoke with Maria Santos, the owner who'd worked with Sophia and me to create the perfect gown. Mrs. Richardson, I was just thinking about calling you. Sophia's dress is ready for final pickup, and it's absolutely stunning. She's going to be the most beautiful bride. Maria, I need to discuss a complication with the wedding. There have been family issues that require me to cancel my financial support for the event. Oh my goodness, what happened? Sophia and her fiancé have decided that my presence at the wedding would create problems, so they've uninvited me while expecting me to continue paying for their celebration. They uninvited you? The grandmother who's been handling all the wedding expenses? Exactly. So I'm withdrawing all financial support, which unfortunately includes the wedding dress. Mrs. Richardson, I completely understand your position. That dress is paid for and belongs to you legally until it's gifted to Sophia. What would you like me to do? Hold the dress until this situation is resolved. If Sophia wants to purchase it herself, she's welcome to do so. But I won't be gifting an $8,000 gown to someone who doesn't want me present to see her wear it. That seems entirely reasonable. Mrs. Richardson, in 20 years of bridal work, I've seen plenty of family drama, but I've never seen a bride exclude the person paying for her entire wedding. After ending the call with Maria, I realized that the financial cancellations were only the beginning of what Brandon and Sophia would face. The real consequences would begin when they discovered that their dream wedding had vanished, leaving them with 3 weeks to plan and fund an entirely new celebration. Patricia, when do you think they'll realize what's happened? Probably tomorrow, when vendors start calling them about canceled services and requesting new payment arrangements. And legally, there's nothing they can do to force me to reinstate the contracts? Nothing. You were the contracting party, you provided all payments, and you're exercising legitimate cancellation clauses. Eleanor, they have no legal recourse because they never had legal control. That afternoon, I received a text from Sophia. Grandma, I just want to make sure you're okay with everything we discussed yesterday. I know this is hard, but I think it's the right decision for everyone. I typed and deleted several responses before settling on simple acknowledgement. I'm fine with your decision, Sophia. I hope your wedding day is everything you and Brandon envisioned. What I didn't mention was that their wedding day was rapidly becoming something entirely different from what they'd envisioned, because they'd envisioned a celebration funded by someone they'd decided was too problematic to invite. Patricia, what happens if they try to contact vendors directly and discover the cancellations? Then they'll have to explain to everyone why the person who was paying for their wedding is no longer involved. And they'll have to arrange new payment methods immediately if they want to restore any services. How likely is it that vendors will be available this close to the wedding date? For November 18th? Almost impossible. November is peak wedding season, and premium vendors like the ones you hired are typically booked solid. They'll be looking at significantly lower quality options at much higher last-minute rates. I thought about Sophia and Brandon discovering that their Instagram-perfect wedding had been reduced to whatever vendors were available 3 weeks before one of the busiest wedding weekends of the year. Eleanor, I have to ask, what's your end goal here? Are you hoping they'll apologize and re-invite you? Or are you teaching them a lesson about family respect? I'm hoping they'll recognize that excluding family members while expecting their financial support is untenable. If that recognition comes with an apology and changed behavior, wonderful. If not, at least they'll understand the cost of their choices. And if they proceed with the wedding, using whatever budget and vendors they can arrange independently, then they'll have exactly the wedding they planned and paid for themselves, which is what they should have done from the beginning if they felt my involvement was problematic. As Patricia packed up her legal documents and prepared to leave, I realized that the next phase of this situation would depend entirely on how quickly Brandon and Sophia discovered their new reality, and how they chose to respond when their fantasy collided with financial facts. Patricia, how long before they realize the full scope of what's been canceled? I'd estimate 24 hours. By Friday evening, they'll know that their entire wedding has been dismantled. Some lessons about family relationships require dramatic consequences to be fully understood, and some young couples were about to learn that taking family for granted had costs that extended far beyond hurt feelings. Brandon and Sophia were about to discover exactly how expensive their desire for a drama-free wedding was going to be. Friday arrived with the kind of crisp November morning that would have been perfect for wedding planning, which made what was about to unfold even more poetic. I was in my garden, deadheading the last of the autumn roses, when my phone rang at 10:23 a.m. Sophia's name appeared on the screen, and I could hear the panic in her voice before she even spoke. Grandma Eleanor, something's wrong. The Rosewood estate just called and said our booking was canceled. They're saying you requested the cancellation. There has to be some kind of mistake. There's no mistake, Sophia. I canceled the venue booking yesterday, along with all other wedding services. You canceled what? Why would you do that? Because you uninvited me from the wedding I was paying for. If my presence would ruin your special day, then my financial support was obviously unwelcome as well. The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds while Sophia processed the reality of what I'd done. Grandma, you can't just cancel our wedding because you're upset about not being invited. We need those vendors. The wedding is in 3 weeks. Sophia, I'm not canceling your wedding. You're perfectly free to get married whenever and wherever you choose. You're just planning and paying for that wedding yourselves now. But we don't have $130,000 for the venue and everything else. You know we can't afford that. Then perhaps you should have considered your financial limitations before uninviting your primary source of wedding funding. Grandma Eleanor, this is insane. You're destroying our wedding because your feelings are hurt? I'm withdrawing financial support from people who don't want my presence in their lives. Sophia, you made it very clear that I create drama and family conflict. I'm simply removing that source of conflict from your celebration. Brandon's voice came through the background, apparently coaching Sophia on what to say. Tell her that families support each other even when they disagree. Grandma, Brandon says that families support each other even during disagreements. You're supposed to love us unconditionally. Sophia, unconditional love doesn't require unconditional financial support. I'll always love you, but I won't fund celebrations that exclude me. This is emotional blackmail. No, Sophia. Emotional blackmail is what you and Brandon did when you uninvited me while expecting me to continue paying for your wedding. What I've done is simply applied the logical consequences of your decision. After ending the call, I realized that Sophia genuinely hadn't understood that actions have consequences, particularly when those actions involved treating generous family members as disposable once their utility had been extracted. An hour later, my phone rang again. This time it was Brandon, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Eleanor, we need to talk. What you've done is completely unreasonable and vindictive. Brandon, I've simply respected your decision that my presence would create problems. Now your wedding day will be problem-free. You know we can't afford to replace all those vendors. You're deliberately sabotaging our wedding out of spite. I'm withdrawing from a wedding where I'm not welcome. Brandon, you convinced Sophia that family relationships should be subordinated to your comfort and preferences. Now you're discovering the financial implications of that philosophy. Eleanor, let's be practical here. We made a mistake excluding you. If you restore the vendor contracts, we'll figure out a way to include you appropriately. Brandon, what you've just offered is exactly what emotional blackmail sounds like. You're suggesting that I should provide financial support in exchange for grudging inclusion in your celebration. That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. You're offering to tolerate my presence if I pay for your wedding, which means you still don't understand that family relationships aren't transactional arrangements. Eleanor, please be reasonable. Sophia is devastated. You're ruining the most important day of her life. Brandon, I'm not ruining anything. You ruined Sophia's wedding when you convinced her to exclude the person funding it. I'm simply declining to finance my own exclusion. Can we meet in person to discuss this? There's nothing to discuss. You made your decision about my role in your lives, and I've made mine about my financial responsibilities to people who don't value family relationships. That afternoon brought a parade of phone calls from frantic vendors who were being contacted by Brandon and Sophia about reinstating canceled services. Maria from the bridal boutique called first. Mrs. Richardson. Sophia came in demanding her wedding dress, claiming there was a misunderstanding about payment. I told her the dress belongs to you until ownership is legally transferred, and she became very upset. How upset? She threatened to call the police and accused me of holding her property hostage. Mrs. Richardson, I've been in this business for 20 years, and I've never seen a bride treat the person paying for her wedding with such disrespect. The florist called next. Mrs. Richardson, the young man, Brandon, came to our shop demanding that we honor the original contract even though payment has been withdrawn. He seemed to think that verbal agreements override legal contracts. What did you tell him? That we require payment before providing services, and since his name isn't on any contracts, he has no legal standing to demand anything. He didn't take that well. By evening, I'd received calls from 6 different vendors, all reporting similar encounters with Brandon and Sophia, who seemed genuinely shocked that canceling payment also canceled services, and that their names not being on contracts meant they had no legal rights to demand vendor compliance. Eleanor, Patricia called to update me on the legal situation. Brandon contacted our office, demanding that we reverse all cancellations, claiming that you're acting irrationally due to emotional distress. What did you tell him? that you're mentally competent, legally authorized to cancel contracts you entered into, and that his opinion about your emotional state is irrelevant to your legal rights. Did he threaten legal action? He mentioned consulting attorneys about elder abuse and financial manipulation, but Patricia, any lawyer will tell him that you have absolute right to spend your money as you choose, and that withdrawing financial support isn't elder abuse, it's personal autonomy. Saturday morning brought the most interesting development yet. I was reading the newspaper over breakfast when I heard car doors slamming in my driveway. Through my kitchen window, I could see Brandon's Tesla parked behind a black Escalade I didn't recognize. The doorbell rang insistently, followed by aggressive knocking. "Eleanor, we know you're in there. Open the door." Brandon's voice carried the kind of desperation that suggested yesterday's vendor meetings hadn't gone well. I opened the door to find Brandon accompanied by an older man in an expensive suit who had Brandon's jawline and entitled expression. "Eleanor, this is my father, Richard Walsh. He wanted to discuss this situation with you directly." Richard Walsh extended his hand with the practiced confidence of someone accustomed to solving problems through influence and intimidation. "Ms. Richardson, I understand there's been a misunderstanding about Brandon and Sophia's wedding arrangements. I'm here to help resolve this situation amicably." "Mr. Walsh, there's been no misunderstanding. Your son convinced my granddaughter to exclude me from their wedding, so I've withdrawn my financial support. The situation is already resolved." "Ms. Richardson, Brandon explained the family dynamics involved, and I think we can find a compromise that works for everyone. What if we adjusted the guest arrangements to ensure you're comfortable attending?" I looked at Richard Walsh and realized that Brandon's entitled attitude came from a family that had never encountered problems money couldn't solve or situations where their preferences weren't automatically accommodated. "Mr. Walsh, your son doesn't want me at his wedding, and I don't want to finance celebrations where I'm unwelcome. No compromise is necessary. Ms. Richardson, let's be practical. You've already invested significantly in this wedding. Walking away now means losing that investment entirely. Mr. Walsh, I've lost nothing except the opportunity to fund people who don't respect family relationships. Some confrontations, I was learning, revealed generational patterns of entitlement that explained exactly how young men like Brandon developed the assumption that family members existed to serve their preferences without expecting reciprocal respect. And some fathers were about to discover that their sons' mistakes had consequences that family money and influence couldn't remedy. Richard Walsh stood on my doorstep with the confidence of a man who'd spent his career solving problems through corporate leverage and strategic intimidation. His expensive cologne and tailored suit suggested someone unaccustomed to hearing the word no from people he considered beneath his social and financial status. "Ms. Richardson, I think you're making this situation more complicated than it needs to be. Brandon tells me you're upset about some miscommunication regarding wedding invitations." "Mr. Walsh, there was no miscommunication. Your son deliberately convinced my granddaughter to exclude me from the wedding I was funding because he believed my presence would create drama. Look, sometimes young people make poor decisions about family dynamics, but surely we can find a solution that doesn't involve destroying their wedding plans 3 weeks before the ceremony." "Mr. Walsh, I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply declining to finance my own exclusion from family celebrations." Richard's expression shifted from diplomatic to calculating, apparently recognizing that charm and reason weren't working with me. "Ms. Richardson, Brandon mentioned that you're recently widowed and living alone. Sometimes grief can affect judgment about family relationships. Perhaps you're not seeing this situation as clearly as you could." I felt a chill at Richard's casual suggestion that my decision was the result of grief-impaired judgment rather than reasonable response to disrespectful treatment. "Mr. Walsh, my mental state is perfectly clear. Your son disrespected me, influenced my granddaughter to do the same, and is now facing the financial consequences of that choice." "Eleanor," Brandon interjected, his voice taking on a wheedling tone, "Dad can help us figure this out. His law firm handles family disputes all the time." "Brandon, this isn't a family dispute requiring legal intervention. This is a financial decision made by someone who was treated poorly by people seeking her generosity." Richard pulled out his phone and began typing, apparently researching something while standing on my front porch. "Ms. Richardson, I'm looking at public records for your property and business holdings. You're clearly a wealthy woman who can afford to honor commitments already made to these young people. Mr. Walsh, my wealth is irrelevant to my decision. I could afford to fund a dozen weddings, but I choose not to fund celebrations that exclude me. But surely you understand that canceling wedding arrangements 3 weeks beforehand is unreasonable and potentially cruel to your own granddaughter. Mr. Walsh, what's cruel is convincing a young woman to exclude her family while expecting their financial support. Your son created this situation through manipulation and disrespect. Richard's diplomatic facade was beginning to crack, revealing the aggressive businessman underneath. Ms. Richardson, let me be direct. Brandon and Sophia have already sent invitations, made commitments to guests, and built expectations around this wedding. Canceling everything now would be publicly embarrassing and potentially damaging to their social and professional reputations. Mr. Walsh, their reputations are their responsibility to manage, just as their wedding is now their responsibility to fund. Look, I don't know what Brandon did to offend you, but surely we can resolve this without nuclear options that hurt innocent people. The only innocent person in this situation is Sophia, who was manipulated by your son into making terrible decisions about family relationships. Brandon stepped forward, his composure finally breaking under the stress of watching his father fail to intimidate me into compliance. Eleanor, you're being completely unreasonable. We made one mistake about family dynamics, and you're destroying our entire wedding over it. Brandon, you made a calculated decision to exclude me while keeping my money. That wasn't a mistake. That was manipulation. You're acting like a vindictive old woman who can't handle not being the center of attention. Brandon, Richard snapped, apparently recognizing that his son had just provided me with perfect evidence of the disrespect that had created this situation. No, Dad. Somebody needs to tell her the truth. She's always been controlling and demanding with Sophia, and we finally set appropriate boundaries, and now she's having a tantrum about it. I looked at Brandon Walsh, handsome, privileged, and completely convinced that his comfort was more important than family relationships, and realized that reasoning with him was impossible. Brandon, thank you for clarifying your true feelings about me and family relationships. You've just confirmed that my decision to withdraw financial support was absolutely correct. Richard grabbed Brandon's arm, apparently trying to prevent further damage to their negotiating position. Ms. Richardson, Brandon is understandably stressed about the wedding situation. Young people sometimes express themselves poorly under pressure. Mr. Walsh, what Brandon has expressed is his actual opinion of me, which makes it very clear why he wanted me excluded from his wedding. I'm simply honoring that preference completely. Ms. Richardson, what would it take to restore the wedding arrangements? What do you need from Brandon and Sophia to feel comfortable proceeding with the original plans? I need nothing from them, Mr. Walsh. They've made their priorities clear, and I've adjusted my financial decisions accordingly. Are you saying there's no amount of apology or accommodation that would change your mind? I'm saying that I won't be manipulated into funding celebrations for people who view me as a problem to be managed, rather than family to be valued. Richard Walsh was quiet for several minutes, apparently calculating whether there were other forms of pressure he could apply to change my decision. Mrs. Richardson, I could arrange to cover the wedding expenses myself if that would resolve this situation. That's very generous, Mr. Walsh, but the financial arrangements aren't my concern anymore. Your son and my granddaughter need to learn about consequences for treating family members poorly. You're really going to let stubbornness ruin your granddaughter's wedding? Mr. Walsh, I'm going to let your son explain to Sophia why his disrespect for her family has ruined the wedding she dreamed about. After the Walshes left, driving away in their luxury vehicles with the frustrated energy of people whose wealth and influence had failed to produce their desired outcome, I realized that Brandon's entitled behavior was a family characteristic rather than an individual flaw. Richard Walsh had spent 30 minutes trying every manipulation tactic in his corporate arsenal: sympathy, reason, intimidation, bribery, and guilt, without ever acknowledging that his son had behaved inappropriately or that I had legitimate grounds for my decision. That afternoon, Sophia called again, her voice hoarse from what sounded like hours of crying. Grandma Eleanor, please, I'm begging you to reconsider. I know we made a mistake, but please don't punish me for Brandon's poor judgment. Sophia, I'm not punishing you. I'm teaching both of you that family relationships have value that shouldn't be discarded for convenience. But the wedding is ruined. We can't afford to replace all those vendors, and even if we could, nothing this good is available 3 weeks before the ceremony. Sophia, then perhaps you should postpone the wedding until you can plan and fund something you can afford independently. But all our friends are flying in, Brandon's business partners are coming, we've told everyone about the Rosewood Estate ceremony. It will be humiliating to cancel or downgrade everything. Sophia, being humiliated by your own poor decisions is how people learn to make better decisions in the future. Grandma, please, I love you, and I want you at my wedding. Can't we figure out a way to fix this? I felt my heart soften at Sophia's distress, but I also recognized that this conversation was happening only because financial consequences had made her reconsider her choices, not because she'd developed genuine understanding of family relationships. Sophia, do you understand why I was hurt by your decision to exclude me? Because you were paying for everything? No, sweetheart. Because for 8 years, I've been your primary family, and you discarded me the moment Brandon convinced you I was inconvenient. I didn't mean to discard you. I just wanted Brandon to be comfortable at our wedding. And what about my comfort, Sophia? What about my feelings about being excluded from one of the most important days in your life? For the first time since this crisis began, Sophia was quiet for more than a few seconds, apparently actually considering my perspective rather than just defending her decisions. Some granddaughters, I was learning, needed dramatic consequences to recognize that family relationships required reciprocal respect and consideration. And some lessons about love and loyalty could only be taught through the temporary withdrawal of the security that had been taken for granted. Sunday evening brought an unexpected visitor to my front door. Through the peephole, I could see a young woman I didn't recognize, blonde, expensively dressed, and carrying herself with the kind of nervous energy that suggested she was about to deliver important information. When I opened the door, she introduced herself with a shaky voice that immediately caught my attention. Mrs. Richardson? I'm Emma Walsh. I think we need to talk about Brandon. I'm sorry, I don't know who you are or how you're connected to this situation. I'm Brandon's wife. The words hit me like ice water. Excuse me? I'm legally married to Brandon Walsh. We've been married for 2 years since 2021. I think you should know that before Sophia makes the biggest mistake of her life. I invited Emma into my living room, my mind racing with the implications of what she'd just revealed. Brandon was already married, which meant that his wedding to Sophia would be illegal and invalid. Emma, I need you to explain this slowly. You're saying that Brandon is currently married to you while planning to marry my granddaughter? Yes, we got married for tax and business purposes when Brandon's influencer income started generating serious money. Our accountant recommended it for the financial benefits, and we thought it would be easy to dissolve later if needed. But you never dissolved the marriage? Brandon kept postponing the divorce paperwork. He said it was complicated and expensive, and that we should wait until his business situation stabilized. Meanwhile, he was dating Sophia and apparently planning this elaborate wedding ceremony. I felt a mixture of rage and vindication as I realized that Brandon's manipulation extended far beyond family dynamics into outright fraud and bigamy. Emma, why are you telling me this now? Because I found out about the wedding through his social media posts, and I've been watching the drama unfold over the past few days. When I saw that you'd canceled all the wedding vendors, I realized this was my chance to stop him from committing bigamy while destroying both our lives. How long have you known about Sophia? I've known he was dating someone for over a year, but I assumed it was casual. Brandon and I have an open marriage arrangement. We're married legally, but not romantically. But when I saw the engagement announcement and wedding planning posts, I realized he was planning to commit a serious crime. Emma pulled out her phone and showed me photographs of legal documents, marriage certificates, and text conversations that provided undeniable evidence of her marriage to Brandon. Mrs. Richardson, I don't want to hurt Sophia, but I also can't let Brandon commit bigamy using my legal marriage as his foundation. If he marries her while still married to me, both of them could face criminal charges. Emma, does Sophia know anything about you or your marriage to Brandon? Nothing. I've been completely secret from his family and social media presence. Brandon compartmentalized our business relationship from his personal life so thoroughly that most people don't know I exist. I studied Emma's face, looking for signs of deception or ulterior motives, but she appeared genuinely concerned about the legal and ethical implications of Brandon's deception. Emma, what do you want me to do with this information? I want you to help me prevent Brandon from destroying multiple lives through his selfishness and fraud. Mrs. Richardson, Sophia deserves to know that the man she's planning to marry is already legally committed to someone else. Why haven't you told her directly? Because I'm Brandon's wife, and anything I say will look like jealousy or vindictiveness. But you're her grandmother, who's been protecting her from his manipulation. If this information comes from you, she might actually listen. I realized that Emma was offering me the final piece of evidence I needed to demonstrate to Sophia that Brandon's character flaws extended far beyond disrespecting family members into criminal deception. Emma, are you willing to provide legal documentation of your marriage to Brandon? Absolutely. I brought copies of everything: marriage certificate, joint tax returns, shared business documents, bank account records. Mrs. Richardson, I have 2 years of evidence that Brandon Walsh is legally married to me while planning to marry your granddaughter. What happens if Brandon discovers that you've told me about your marriage? He'll probably panic and try to accelerate his plans or find ways to discredit me. But Mrs. Richardson, I can't continue being part of his deception. If he wants to marry Sophia, he needs to divorce me first and be honest about his situation. I spent the next hour reviewing Emma's documentation, which painted a clear picture of a business marriage that Brandon had maintained for financial benefits while pursuing a romantic relationship that he'd planned to formalize without dissolving his existing legal commitments. Emma, this is extremely serious. Brandon would be committing bigamy, which is a felony in California. I know. That's why I'm here. Mrs. Richardson, I don't want to see Sophia face criminal consequences for unknowingly participating in Brandon's fraud. What would you like me to do? Show Sophia the evidence. Let her make an informed decision about whether she wants to marry someone who's already married and has been lying about it for their entire relationship. Emma, are you prepared to testify about this marriage if legal proceedings become necessary? Yes, Mrs. Richardson. I made a mistake agreeing to this arrangement with Brandon, and I need to take responsibility for enabling his deception, even if that means facing consequences for my own poor judgment. After Emma left, I sat in my living room surrounded by documentation that proved Brandon Walsh was not only manipulative and disrespectful, but also a criminal who was planning to commit bigamy while defrauding my granddaughter about his marital status. I called Patricia immediately, despite the late hour. Patricia, I have new information about Brandon Walsh that changes everything about this situation. What kind of information? He's already married to another woman and has been for 2 years. His wedding to Sophia would constitute bigamy, which makes this situation criminal rather than just personal. Eleanor, that's extremely serious. Bigamy is a felony, and both parties can face criminal charges even if one of them was unaware of the existing marriage. Patricia, I need to present this information to Sophia in a way that protects her from potential criminal liability while helping her understand the full scope of Brandon's deception. Eleanor, this information needs to be reported to authorities immediately. Sophia could unknowingly become an accessory to a serious crime. How do I handle this with Sophia? Very carefully. She needs to understand that proceeding with this wedding without legal resolution of Brandon's existing marriage could result in criminal charges for both of them. As I prepared for bed, I realized that the next conversation with Sophia would involve much more than hurt feelings about wedding invitations. I was about to inform my granddaughter that the man she loved was a criminal who'd been defrauding her about his legal status while planning to involve her in felony bigamy. Some men, I was discovering, were capable of deception that extended far beyond family manipulation into criminal fraud that could destroy multiple lives. And some grandmothers had the power to prevent their granddaughters from unknowingly participating in crimes that would have lifetime consequences. Tomorrow, Brandon Walsh's carefully constructed web of lies would begin to unravel completely, and Sophia would finally understand why I'd been trying to protect her from a man whose character flaws were much deeper and more dangerous than simple disrespect for family relationships. Monday morning, I called Sophia at 9 a.m. sharp, knowing she and Brandon would both be awake for their morning content creation routine. The carefully orchestrated social media posts that maintained their influencer income. Grandma Eleanor, if you're calling about the wedding vendors again, we're handling everything ourselves now. Brandon's father is helping us arrange new services. Sophia, I need you to come to my house immediately. There's something about Brandon that you need to know before you make any permanent decisions about your relationship. What kind of something? Something that affects the legality of your marriage, Sophia. This is urgent, and it needs to be discussed in person. Grandma, I don't have time for more drama about family relationships. We're dealing with a wedding crisis. Sophia, this isn't about family relationships. This is about Brandon's legal status and your potential criminal liability if you proceed with this wedding. The word criminal got Sophia's attention in a way that emotional appeals hadn't. Criminal? What are you talking about? Come to my house in the next hour and bring Brandon with you. What I have to show you affects both your futures. Grandma, you're scaring me. Good. You should be scared. Sophia, trust me one more time and come here immediately. 45 minutes later, Brandon's Tesla pulled into my driveway with both of them inside, their expressions ranging from confused to irritated as they approached my front door. Eleanor, Sophia said you have some kind of urgent legal information? Brandon's voice carried the kind of defensive hostility that suggested he suspected what this meeting might involve. Yes, Brandon. Information about your existing marriage to Emma Walsh. The color drained from Brandon's face so quickly that Sophia immediately noticed his reaction. Marriage to who? Brandon, what is she talking about? Sophia, Brandon has been legally married to Emma Walsh since 2021. He's been planning to marry you while still married to another woman, which constitutes bigamy and would make your marriage ceremony legally invalid. Sophia looked between Brandon and me with growing alarm. Brandon, is that true? It's complicated, Sophia. Emma and I have a business arrangement, not a real marriage. It was purely for tax and financial benefits. But you're legally married to her? Technically, yes, but there's no technically about legal marriage, Brandon, I interrupted, placing Emma's documentation on my coffee table. Here's your marriage certificate, joint tax returns, shared business records, and bank account information covering 2 years of legal marriage to Emma Walsh. Sophia picked up the marriage certificate with shaking hands, reading the official document that proved Brandon had been legally married throughout their entire relationship. Brandon, you've been married this whole time? While we were dating, while we got engaged, while we planned our wedding? Sophia, it's not what you think. Emma and I aren't romantically involved. It's purely a business arrangement that I've been planning to dissolve. When, Brandon? When were you planning to dissolve it? Before or after you committed bigamy by marrying me? I was going to handle the divorce paperwork after our wedding ceremony. The timing just got complicated. I felt cold satisfaction watching Brandon scramble to explain his criminal deception to Sophia, who was finally seeing his true character without the filter of manipulation and charm. Sophia, I said gently, bigamy is a felony in California. If you'd proceeded with this wedding, both you and Brandon could have faced criminal charges, even if you were unaware of his existing marriage. Criminal charges? For getting married? For participating in illegal bigamy, yes. Sophia, Brandon was planning to involve you in a serious crime while keeping you ignorant of the legal risks you'd be facing. Sophia set down the marriage certificate and looked at Brandon with an expression I'd never seen before. Complete disillusionment replacing the adoration she'd maintained throughout their relationship. Brandon, explain to me how you were planning to marry me while still married to someone else. Sophia, lots of people have complicated legal situations. I was going to straighten everything out after our ceremony. After our ceremony? That would have been illegal? Brandon, you were planning to commit a crime using me as an unwitting accomplice. That's not how I saw it. That's exactly what you were doing. Sophia's voice rose with anger and betrayal. You were planning to make me part of your fraud without even telling me about the legal risks. Brandon's composure was cracking under the pressure of having his deception exposed with documentation he couldn't deny or explain away. Sophia, if you just let me handle the legal complications, none of this would have been a problem. Brandon, the legal complications exist because you've been lying to me about being married to another woman for our entire relationship. I didn't lie. I just didn't mention Emma because she's irrelevant to our relationship. She's irrelevant. Brandon, she's your wife. Legally, officially, your wife. How is your marriage to another woman irrelevant to our marriage? I watched Sophia process the full scope of Brandon's deception, recognizing that his lies extended far beyond family dynamics into fundamental dishonesty about his legal status and identity. Sophia, I said quietly, this is why I was concerned about Brandon's character. Men who lie about major life circumstances rarely limit their deception to just one area. Grandma, you knew about this. I learned about it yesterday when Emma contacted me. She's been watching the wedding drama and realized she couldn't let Brandon commit bigamy using their existing marriage. Emma contacted you? Why? Because she doesn't want to see you face criminal charges for unknowingly participating in Brandon's fraud. Sophia, Emma is trying to protect you from the consequences of Brandon's deception. Brandon stood up abruptly, his carefully maintained influencer composure completely abandoned now that his criminal plans had been exposed. This is ridiculous. Emma and I can dissolve our marriage quickly if that's what everyone wants. Brandon, you should have dissolved your marriage before proposing to another woman, Sophia said with cold finality. You should have been honest about your legal status before planning a wedding ceremony that would have been criminal fraud. Sophia, we can fix this. I'll file divorce papers with Emma immediately, and we can postpone our wedding until everything is legal. Brandon, you're missing the point. The problem isn't the timing of your divorce. The problem is that you've been lying to me about fundamental facts of your life while planning to involve me in criminal activity. I wasn't trying to involve you in anything criminal. That's exactly what you were doing. Brandon, bigamy is a crime whether you intended it to be criminal or not. Sophia gathered up Emma's documentation and looked at Brandon with the kind of finality that indicated she'd reached a decision about more than just wedding timing. Brandon, I can't marry someone who lies about being married to other people. I can't trust someone who would involve me in criminal activity without my knowledge. And I can't build a life with someone whose solution to legal complications is more deception and fraud. Sophia, you're overreacting. This is fixable. No, Brandon, this isn't fixable. You've destroyed any possibility of trust between us. As Brandon left my house with the desperate energy of someone whose carefully constructed life was collapsing, I realized that Sophia had finally seen past his manipulation to recognize his fundamental dishonesty and criminality. Grandma Eleanor, Sophia said after Brandon's Tesla disappeared down my driveway, I owe you an enormous apology. You were trying to protect me from someone who was planning to involve me in criminal fraud, and I accused you of creating drama. Sophia, you were manipulated by someone who's very skilled at deception. That's not your fault, but I should have listened to your concerns instead of excluding you from my life. Some granddaughters, I was learning, needed dramatic evidence of their partner's criminality to recognize manipulation that had been disguised as love. And some lessons about trust and family loyalty required the complete exposure of deception before wisdom could be fully absorbed. Brandon Walsh's criminal fraud had been stopped, but the real work of rebuilding trust and family relationships was just beginning. The week following Brandon's exposure as a married man brought a series of revelations that demonstrated just how deep his deception had run throughout Sophia's life. As we sat in my living room, going through the remnants of their relationship, each discovery added another layer to the fraud she'd been living without realizing it. Grandma Eleanor, look at this, Sophia said, holding up her laptop with Brandon's Instagram feed displayed. He's been posting content about building a life with his soulmate while being legally married to Emma. Every romantic post about our relationship was technically a lie. Sophia, what bothers you most about discovering Brandon's marriage? The legal deception or the emotional betrayal? The complete dishonesty about who he was. I thought I knew everything important about his life, but he had an entire legal identity that he kept secret from me for 3 years. I watched Sophia process the recognition that her entire relationship had been built on a foundation of deliberate deception, and felt proud of her clarity in analyzing the situation rather than making excuses for Brandon's behavior. Grandma, there's something else I need to tell you. Last night, I called Emma to apologize for unknowingly participating in the situation. What did Emma say? She said Brandon had been telling her that I was just a social media partnership for content creation, not a real romantic relationship. He convinced her that our engagement was fake, designed to boost both our follower counts and sponsorship opportunities. The scope of Brandon's manipulation was becoming clearer. He'd been lying to both women about the nature of his relationship with the other, creating parallel deceptions that allowed him to maintain multiple commitments without either woman understanding the full picture. Emma also told me something that explains why Brandon was so determined to exclude you from our wedding. What kind of explanation? He'd been planning to use our wedding as content for a documentary about influencer culture that he'd already sold to a streaming platform for $300,000. The narrative was supposed to be about young entrepreneurs building successful businesses and relationships independently. And my presence would have contradicted that narrative? Your presence would have revealed that the wedding was funded by family money rather than independent success. Brandon needed to maintain the illusion that we were self-made entrepreneurs, not young people being supported by wealthy family members. I felt a new level of anger at Brandon's calculated deception. He'd excluded me not just to avoid family complications, but to protect a fraudulent business narrative that would have earned him hundreds of thousands of dollars. Sophia, Brandon was planning to profit financially from your wedding while lying about how it was funded? Worse than that. Emma said he'd already received advance payments from sponsors who believed they were supporting an authentic young love story rather than a bigamist's fake wedding ceremony. What happens to those sponsorship commitments now that the wedding is canceled? Brandon has to return the advance payments and face potential legal action from companies that contracted for content he can't deliver. Emma says he could face fraud charges from multiple sources now that his deceptions are being exposed. My phone rang, interrupting our conversation. Patricia Wells was calling with updates on the legal implications of Brandon's exposed marriage. Eleanor, I've been researching the criminal aspects of Brandon's situation, and it's more serious than we initially realized. How much more serious? Brandon's marriage to Emma appears to have been fraudulent from the beginning. I've found evidence that they never lived together as spouses, never filed joint insurance claims, and maintained completely separate financial lives except for tax benefits. What does that mean legally? It means their marriage may have been a sham designed specifically to defraud the tax system, which is federal criminal fraud. Combined with his attempted bigamy and the sponsorship fraud Sophia discovered, Brandon could be facing multiple felony charges. Patricia, what's Sophia's legal exposure in this situation? Minimal, since she was an unknowing victim of Brandon's deception. However, she should cooperate fully with any investigations and avoid any appearance of continuing to protect Brandon. After ending the call with Patricia, I realized that Sophia was actually fortunate to have discovered Brandon's criminality before marrying him, even though the discovery had been painful and humiliating. Sophia, I know this situation has been devastating, but you've avoided becoming legally entangled with someone who's facing serious criminal charges. I know, Grandma, but I keep thinking about how completely I misjudged his character. How did I miss all the signs of his deception? Because Brandon is sophisticated about manipulation, and because you were generous enough to trust someone you loved. Sophia, being deceived by a skilled liar isn't a reflection of your judgment. It's evidence of his criminality. I just feel so stupid for excluding you from my life because of someone who was lying about everything fundamental about his identity. Sophia, what are you learning about family relationships through this experience? That family members who love you ask hard questions because they want to protect you, not because they want to control you. And that people who try to isolate you from family are usually trying to prevent you from getting advice that would expose their deception. That afternoon brought an unexpected visit from Emma Walsh, who arrived with a folder of additional documentation about Brandon's fraudulent activities. Sophia, I wanted to apologize personally for my role in enabling Brandon's deception, even if I didn't understand the full scope of what he was planning. Emma, you tried to prevent me from unknowingly committing a crime. I should be thanking you, not receiving apologies. There's something else you both need to know. Brandon has been contacting me since yesterday, trying to convince me to lie about our marriage timeline to help him avoid criminal charges. What kind of lies? I asked. He wants me to claim that we were already divorced when he proposed to Sophia, or that our marriage was never valid in the first place. Emma pulled out her phone and showed us text messages from Brandon that documented his attempts to suborn perjury. Emma, are you going to cooperate with his cover-up attempts? Absolutely not. Mrs. Richardson, I've already contacted the FBI about the tax fraud aspects of our marriage, and I'm planning to testify honestly about Brandon's criminal activities. Sophia looked at Emma with something approaching admiration. Emma, you're risking legal consequences yourself by being honest about the marriage fraud. Sophia, I made mistakes that enabled Brandon's crimes, and I need to take responsibility for that, but I won't make things worse by helping him cover up additional crimes. As Emma left, promising to keep us informed about legal proceedings, Sophia and I spent the evening planning her immediate future now that her wedding and relationship had been canceled. Grandma, I want to ask you something. The vendors you canceled, was that to teach me a lesson about family relationships? Or did you suspect that Brandon was hiding something more serious? Initially, it was about family relationships and respect. But Sophia, I'd been concerned about Brandon's character for months, and canceling the wedding preserved your options when more serious problems emerged. So you were protecting me from criminal involvement even before you knew about the marriage fraud. I was protecting you from someone whose disrespect for family suggested deeper character flaws that would eventually surface. That evening, as we reviewed the financial documents that would be needed for potential criminal proceedings against Brandon, Sophia asked the question that had been building throughout our conversations. Grandma Eleanor, when this is all over and Brandon is facing the legal consequences of his crimes, what happens to us? Can we rebuild our relationship after I treated you so poorly? Sophia, our relationship never ended. You were manipulated into making poor decisions about family. But that doesn't change the fact that I love you and want what's best for your future. Even after I excluded you from my wedding and accused you of creating drama? Especially after that, because it taught both of us valuable lessons about manipulation, family loyalty, and the importance of asking hard questions about people who try to isolate us from people who love us. Some granddaughters, I was learning, became stronger and wiser after experiencing sophisticated manipulation from skilled criminals. And some family relationships were resilient enough to survive temporary deceptions when they were built on genuine love rather than transactional convenience. Tomorrow, Brandon Walsh would begin facing criminal charges for multiple forms of fraud. But tonight, Sophia and I would plan her future with the wisdom that came from recognizing that family members who ask hard questions usually do so because they're trying to protect rather than control. 2 weeks after Brandon's criminal activities had been exposed, Sophia and I were sitting in the district attorney's office as she provided testimony about her unknowing involvement in his fraudulent schemes. The prosecutor, Assistant DA Maria Santos, had been thorough in explaining how Sophia's cooperation would help build a comprehensive case against Brandon while protecting her from any criminal liability. Ms. Richardson, your testimony about Mr. Walsh's concealment of his existing marriage provides crucial evidence for our bigamy charges, DA Santos explained. Combined with the tax fraud evidence from Emma Walsh and the sponsorship fraud documentation, we're building a strong case for multiple felony counts. What kind of sentence is Brandon facing if convicted? Sophia asked. Given the scope of the fraud, federal tax crimes, attempted bigamy, wire fraud for the sponsorship schemes, we're looking at potentially 15 to 20 years in federal prison. I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness, knowing that Brandon would face serious consequences for his crimes, but also recognizing that his actions had damaged multiple lives, including Sophia's trust in relationships and her confidence in her own judgment. After leaving the DA's office, Sophia and I drove to the Rosewood estate, which I'd arranged to visit one final time before closing this chapter of our experience completely. Grandma Eleanor, why did you want to come back here? Because this place represents both the dream you had and the nightmare Brandon created. I wanted you to see it again and decide whether you have any regrets about the wedding that didn't happen. We walked through the gardens where Sophia's reception would have been held, past the ceremony site where she would have unknowingly committed bigamy, through the spaces that had been designed to celebrate a relationship built entirely on deception. Grandma, looking at this place now, I can't believe I was willing to exclude you from celebrating here with me. This should have been about family and love, not Brandon's social media business and fraudulent sponsorship deals. Sophia, what would you want if you decided to get married in the future to someone who actually deserves you? Something completely different, smaller, more intimate, focused on the people who actually care about me rather than the people who want to use the celebration for content creation. And you'd want family present? I'd want you at the center of everything, because you're the person who protected me when I was too manipulated to protect myself. As we sat on a bench overlooking the vineyard where Sophia's wedding photographs would have been taken, she asked the question that had been building throughout our healing process. Grandma, I need to ask you something directly. When you canceled all the wedding vendors, were you hoping that I'd apologize and re-invite you? Or were you genuinely prepared to let me get married without you? I thought carefully about Sophia's question, recognizing that my answer would affect her understanding of family relationships and conditional love for the rest of her life. Sophia, I was genuinely prepared to let you get married without me, if that's what you truly wanted. But I wasn't prepared to finance my own exclusion from your life. What's the difference? The difference is that I would have respected your choice about who to include in your celebration, but I wouldn't have enabled your assumption that family members exist to provide financial support without receiving emotional respect. So you would have loved me even if I'd married Brandon and excluded you permanently. I would have loved you, but our relationship would have changed fundamentally. Sophia, unconditional love doesn't mean unconditional participation in people's choices when those choices are harmful. Grandma, what if I'd figured out how to pay for the wedding myself and proceeded without your involvement? Then you would have learned valuable lessons about independence and consequences, and probably would have discovered Brandon's criminality eventually anyway. Sophia was quiet for several minutes, processing the recognition that my decision to cancel wedding funding had been about boundaries and self-respect rather than manipulation or control. Grandma Eleanor, I want to tell you something. Yesterday, I received a call from Brandon. What did he want? He wanted me to testify on his behalf, claiming that our relationship was real and that his marriage to Emma was purely business. He thought that if I vouched for his character, it might reduce his criminal sentences. What did you tell him? I told him that I'd be testifying honestly about his deception and manipulation, and that I wouldn't help him avoid consequences for criminal fraud that could have destroyed my life. I felt proud of Sophia's strength in refusing to protect someone who had systematically deceived her while putting her at risk of criminal charges. Sophia, how did Brandon respond to your refusal to help him? He said that families should support each other during difficult times, and that I was being vindictive by cooperating with prosecutors. The same argument he used when he wanted you to exclude me while keeping my financial support? Exactly the same manipulation tactics. Grandma, it's terrifying how clearly I can see his psychological manipulation now that I understand what to look for. What are you learning about recognizing manipulation in relationships? That manipulators always frame their victims' reasonable boundaries as vindictive or unfair, and that people who try to isolate you from family are usually trying to prevent you from getting advice that would expose their deception. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Wells. Eleanor, thought you'd want to know. Brandon was arrested this morning on federal fraud charges. Multiple counts, including tax fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Trial expected next year. I showed the text to Sophia, who read it with a mixture of relief and sadness. I'm glad he's facing consequences, but I also feel sad that someone I loved was capable of such extensive criminality. Sophia, that sadness shows your capacity for genuine love, even when it's not reciprocated appropriately. Grandma, what happens now? With my life, I mean. The wedding is canceled, my relationship is over, and I need to figure out who I am when I'm not being managed by someone else. Now you get to discover who you really are when you're making independent decisions based on your own values rather than someone else's manipulation. I think I want to go back to school, finish my MBA, and build a career that doesn't depend on social media or Brandon's connections. That sounds like an excellent plan. Sophia, what kind of career interests you? Something that helps other people avoid the kind of deception I experienced. Maybe family law, or financial crimes investigation, or victim advocacy. As we prepared to leave the Rosewood estate for the final time, Sophia asked the question that would define our relationship going forward. Grandma Eleanor, I know I hurt you deeply by excluding you and choosing Brandon's manipulation over family relationships. How do we rebuild trust between us? Sophia, trust is rebuilt through consistent actions over time, not through apologies or promises. Show me through your choices that you value family relationships and honest communication, and our trust will rebuild naturally. What if I make mistakes again? What if I'm not perfect at recognizing manipulation or setting appropriate boundaries? Then I'll be here to offer advice and support, just like I've always been. Sophia, the goal isn't perfection. It's growth and mutual respect. That evening, as we planned Sophia's return to graduate school and her future career focused on helping fraud victims, I realized that Brandon's criminality had ultimately led to opportunities for growth and purpose that neither Sophia nor I could have anticipated. Grandma, in a strange way, I'm grateful that Brandon's deception was exposed before I married him. If we'd gone through with the wedding, I might have spent years being gradually isolated from you while unknowingly participating in his criminal enterprises. Sophia, some of the most valuable lessons in life come from our worst experiences, as long as we're willing to learn from them rather than just survive them. Some granddaughters, I was learning, emerged from sophisticated manipulation stronger, wiser, and more committed to family relationships based on honesty rather than convenience. And some criminal schemes ultimately created opportunities for growth and purpose that extended far beyond the immediate damage they'd initially caused. Tomorrow, Sophia would begin rebuilding her life with wisdom earned through surviving deception and choosing truth over comfort. Tonight, we would be grateful for family love that had proven resilient enough to survive manipulation, strong enough to demand respect, and generous enough to forgive mistakes when they led to genuine growth. 1 year after the wedding that never happened, I stood in the packed auditorium of UC Berkeley's law school, watching Sophia deliver the keynote address at their annual symposium on financial crimes and victim advocacy. She'd completed her MBA in record time and was now pursuing a joint law degree focused on helping fraud victims rebuild their lives, a career path that had emerged directly from her experience with Brandon's deception. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sophia began, her voice carrying the confidence that came from transforming personal trauma into professional purpose. 2 years ago, I was an unwitting victim of multiple forms of fraud perpetrated by someone I trusted completely. Today, I want to share what I learned about recognizing manipulation, protecting yourself from financial crimes, and rebuilding your life after discovering that your reality was built on systematic deception. The audience, law students, prosecutors, victim advocates, and fraud survivors, gave Sophia their complete attention as she outlined the sophisticated nature of Brandon's crimes and how they'd been designed to exploit trust and family relationships. The man I planned to marry had convinced me to exclude my grandmother from our wedding while she was funding the entire celebration. This wasn't just family drama. This was a calculated strategy to isolate me from the person most likely to ask hard questions about his background and motivations. I felt pride watching Sophia articulate insights that had taken months to develop, transforming her painful experience into education that could protect other potential victims. What I learned is that financial predators don't just steal money. They steal your ability to trust your own judgment. They systematically undermine your confidence in family relationships, professional instincts, and personal boundaries until you become dependent on their validation and guidance. After the presentation, Sophia joined me for dinner at the restaurant where we'd celebrated her college graduation 5 years earlier, before Brandon had entered her life and nearly destroyed her connection to family and reality. "Grandma Eleanor, I need to tell you something that I've been thinking about since I started law school." "What's that, sweetheart?" "When you canceled the wedding vendors, you weren't just protecting yourself from being excluded. You were protecting me from making the biggest mistake of my life. If I'd married Brandon, I would have become legally entangled with a criminal who could have destroyed my future completely." "Sophia, I was primarily responding to being disrespected. But you're right that canceling the wedding preserved your options when Brandon's criminality was exposed. More than that, if I'd gone through with the bigamous marriage ceremony, I could have faced criminal charges myself. Grandma, you literally saved me from potential prison time." I thought about the chain of events that had led from Brandon's disrespectful text message to Sophia's current career helping other fraud victims, recognizing that sometimes the most painful experiences created the most valuable opportunities for growth and service. "Sophia, what happened to Brandon's criminal case?" "He was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison last month. Tax fraud, wire fraud, bigamy conspiracy, and multiple counts of financial crimes. Emma testified against him, which helped prosecutors understand the full scope of his fraudulent schemes." "How do you feel about his sentence?" "I feel like justice was served, but I also feel grateful that I'm not spending the next 18 years visiting my husband in federal prison while trying to rebuild a life damaged by his criminality." "What about Emma? How is she handling the aftermath of their fraudulent marriage?" "Emma completed her testimony and paid substantial penalties for the tax fraud, but she avoided prison time because she cooperated fully with investigators. She actually reached out to me a few months ago to apologize again for her role in enabling Brandon's deception." "Are you in contact with Emma now?" "We have coffee occasionally. She's become something of a mentor for me as I study financial crimes law. Emma understands the psychology of fraud victims in ways that most professors don't. Our conversation was interrupted by a text message from Patricia Wells. Eleanor, thought you'd want to know. The civil case against Brandon's family trust was settled today. The Walsh family agreed to pay full restitution to fraud victims, including the vendors who lost money on the canceled wedding. I showed the text to Sophia, who read it with satisfaction. Grandma, Richard Walsh spent months trying to protect Brandon from consequences, but ultimately, his family had to pay for the financial damage Brandon caused. Even privilege and wealth couldn't shield him from accountability for criminal fraud. What does this settlement mean for you personally? It means closure. The Walsh family has taken financial responsibility for Brandon's crimes, the vendors have been compensated, and I can focus completely on my future rather than litigation about the past. As we finished dinner, Sophia presented me with a wrapped gift that she'd been carrying since the law school presentation. Grandma, this is something I've been working on for months, and I wanted you to have the first copy. Inside the package was a bound manuscript titled Expensive Lessons, How Family Boundaries Exposed Financial Fraud, with Sophia Richardson listed as the author. You wrote a book about our experience? I wrote a guide for families about recognizing financial manipulation, setting appropriate boundaries with adult children, and protecting against fraud that targets family relationships. Grandma, your decision to cancel wedding funding has become a case study in several law school courses about family financial crimes. I opened the book to find a dedication page that brought tears to my eyes. To my grandmother, Eleanor Richardson, who taught me that love sometimes requires difficult choices, that family loyalty doesn't mean enabling poor decisions, and that the most expensive lessons are often the most valuable ones. Thank you for choosing principle over convenience and family respect over temporary peace. Sophia, this is extraordinary. You've transformed a painful family crisis into resources that could protect other families from similar manipulation. Grandma, I realized that our experience was valuable precisely because it was so difficult. The lessons I learned about manipulation, boundaries, and family relationships are exactly what other people need to avoid falling into similar traps. What response have you received from readers? The book has been used in financial crimes courses at 12 universities, and I've received hundreds of letters from people who recognized manipulation patterns in their own families. Grandma, your willingness to enforce boundaries even when it was painful has helped protect families we'll never meet. As we drove home through the Berkeley Hills, I reflected on the journey that had taken us from Brandon's disrespectful exclusion to Sophia's career helping fraud victims rebuild their lives. Sophia, when Brandon sent that text message uninviting me from your wedding, did you ever imagine it would lead to this? Never. I thought the worst-case scenario was a family argument about wedding invitations. I had no idea we were about to uncover criminal fraud that could have destroyed my entire future. What are you most grateful for about how this situation resolved? I'm grateful that I learned to recognize manipulation before I was legally bound to someone who could have involved me in years of criminal activity. And I'm grateful that our family relationship emerged stronger rather than permanently damaged. Sophia, what would you tell other young people who might be in relationships with manipulative partners? I'd tell them that people who try to isolate you from family members who ask hard questions are usually hiding something serious, and that family members who love you ask difficult questions because they want to protect you, not because they want to control you. As we pulled into my driveway, Sophia asked the question that had been implicit in our conversation throughout the evening. Grandma Eleanor, do you have any regrets about canceling the wedding and exposing Brandon's crimes? My only regret is that you had to experience such sophisticated deception and betrayal. But Sophia, I'm proud that you transformed that experience into wisdom and purpose that will protect other people from similar fraud. My granddaughter thought that excluding me from the wedding I was paying for would be without consequences. She discovered that some grandmothers cancel $130,000 in services with a phone call, and that some lessons about family respect are worth exactly the price of a dream wedding that was built on criminal deception. But most importantly, she learned that the most expensive lessons often become the most valuable gifts, especially when they're shared with others who need the same protection. As Sophia gathered her belongings and prepared to return to her apartment near law school, I realized that Brandon's manipulation had inadvertently created something more valuable than any wedding celebration could have been. A granddaughter who understood the difference between love and control, a career built on protecting others from fraud, and a family relationship strengthened by choosing truth over convenience. Some criminals, I had learned, accidentally create exactly the opposite of what they intended when their victims are strong enough to transform trauma into wisdom, betrayal into purpose, and family crisis into deeper understanding of love and loyalty. Brandon Walsh had intended to isolate Sophia from family influence and exploit her for financial gain. Instead, he had strengthened our family bond and inspired Sophia to dedicate her career to protecting other families from people exactly like him. Some justice, it turned out, was poetic in ways that criminals could never anticipate. The end.